Welcome to the webinar, Is This Online Learning Program Affordable? A toolkit to analyze the cost feasibility of supplemental online learning programs. In this webinar, we'll be talking about what supplemental online learning programs are, how a cost feasibility analysis can inform decisions around piloting, initiating, scaling, or sustaining supplemental online learning programs, and how to use the CFA Toolkit resources to conduct your own cost feasibility analyses. Throughout, you may want to reference the CFA Toolkit. This would be a good place to pause the recording to download the materials. You can use the link on the slide or in the video description below if you do not already have access to the toolkit. Now we'll introduce ourselves and share a bit about the Regional Educational Laboratory Program. We have several facilitators here to lead our webinar. My name is Jessica Mislevy, and I am joined by my colleagues Jonelle Pratt-Williams and Daniela Saucedo. Julie Harris also joined us in facilitating the live event, and we are the four authors of the CFA Toolkit. This webinar is a part of the Regional Educational Laboratory Program administered by the U.S. Department of Education, Institute of Education Sciences. The 10 Regional Educational Laboratories, or RELs, work in partnership with stakeholders to conduct applied research and to support the use of evidence-based practices in the classroom. The mission of the REL program is to support a more evidence-based education system. Through the REL program, we carry out three main activities. We conduct a wide variety of applied research studies. We provide educators and other stakeholders with training, coaching, and technical support needed to use research findings and evidence in the classroom to improve teaching and learning. And we disseminate findings from research in ways that educators and policymakers can use them in practice. And today's webinar is one example of a dissemination event. In short, the REL program offers support to state education agencies, local education agencies, and schools that help practitioners use evidence-based practices. Now, this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. We at REL Appalachia are working with our states and districts on quite a diverse set of projects. In the Appalachian region, we partner with a variety of state and local stakeholders in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia to work on several education-related issues, including improving post-secondary transitions, early literacy, using data and evidence across states, and more. For more information about the projects we are working on, we encourage you to visit the REL Appalachia website. Let's get to our first topic, an overview of supplemental online learning programs. Online, blended, and digital learning programs in K-12 schools in the U.S. are growing in popularity and include an assortment of programs, courses, tools, and resources. In this webinar, you've heard me use the term supplemental online learning programs, which is a type of learning program. So let's take a minute to talk about how exactly we're defining it. Supplemental online learning programs are a type of learning program that allows students to enroll in online courses in addition to the traditional face-to-face courses offered at their school. States and districts might choose to offer these programs for many reasons, including expanding the range of courses available to students, offering increased flexibility to students who have scheduling conflicts or who are otherwise unable to attend regular classes, providing credit recovery options for students who have failed courses, and reducing per student costs. Typically, eligible students enroll in supplemental online programs through their local school, which maintains responsibility for student transcripts, administers required state assessments, offers diplomas, and provides student services. How schools implement supplemental online learning programs varies. So for example, some schools have students take online courses during the school day in a school computer lab monitored by a facilitator, while other schools have students take online courses at home using a personal device. For some specific examples of supplemental online learning programs, let's take a look in our REL Appalachia region at the state of Virginia. First, there is the State Virtual School, Virtual Virginia. The Virginia Department of Education administers Virtual Virginia, a supplemental online program that delivers online courses to Virginia's K-12 students. Virtual Virginia offers access to more than 90 supplemental online courses for Virginia students who otherwise may not be able to take advanced placement, languages, core academic, and elective courses because of a lack of highly qualified instructors, insufficient student enrollment for a local course, or scheduling conflicts in a school. Eligible students enroll in Virtual Virginia courses through their local schools. Virtual Virginia instructors are full-time or adjunct, Virginia licensed, highly qualified, and have experience in distance learning. As of the 2016-17 school year, 24 states were operating online learning programs. More recently, a survey conducted by the Associated Press over the summer indicated that a majority of the 38 responding state departments of education indicated that additional permanent virtual schools and programs will be in place in the coming school year after the COVID-19 pandemic led to increased interest in at-home learning. The Virginia Department of Education also has what they call multi-division online providers. These are private organizations, educational institutions, or nonprofit virtual school organizations that meet Board of Education approval criteria to offer supplemental online instruction to students in multiple school divisions. The Virginia Board of Education has approved more than 20 online providers to contract with local school divisions to provide supplemental online programs. Some of these are other state virtual schools, like Florida Virtual School, while others are vendors, such as Apex Learning, Edgenuity, K-12 Virtual Schools, and Pearson's Connections Academy. There are even some run by other Virginia school divisions, like those in Chesterfield and York counties. Local education leaders in Virginia have a number of choices when it comes to selecting the supplemental online program or programs to offer in their district. And this abundance of choice is not unique to Virginia either. When making decisions about which supplemental online programs to purchase or use, one type of information education leaders need is around the resources required for implementing the programs, such as staff, time, and materials, and their associated costs. And this is where cost feasibility comes in.
So let's talk about cost feasibility analysis and how the CFA Toolkit can support decisions about supplemental online learning programs. What is a cost analysis? A cost analysis is an economic evaluation of resources. There are 4 types of cost analysis. There's cost feasibility, cost effectiveness, cost benefit, and cost utility. Each type of cost analysis starts with the same approach to assess resource costs, the ingredients method, but the analytic method to answer specific cost-related questions varies. Cost feasibility will answer the question, are resources adequate to implement a new policy or program or to scale up an existing one? Cost effectiveness, which of several policies or programs produce the desired outcome for the lowest cost, or which one maximizes the desired outcome for a given cost? Cost benefit, are the economic benefits of a program greater than the cost, particularly over time? And cost utility, do stakeholders such as parents or students value the usefulness of a policy or program compared with the costs? So the ingredients method. It's a detailed process for identifying and calculating the cost of all resources needed to initiate and carry out a program or an intervention. And a good analogy for the ingredients method is baking brownies. So let's think for a minute about everything you would need to make brownies. Initially, you might think about flour or cocoa, sugar, eggs, maybe some other ingredients that go into the actual brownies. But you could not complete the recipe without the physical space of a kitchen, an oven, or baking tools like a bowl or a mixing device like a whisk. You would also need to consider the time of the person baking the brownies as a key ingredient. The ingredients method ensures that if another person wanted to recreate the brownies, they would have a full and accurate understanding of the time and materials needed, because you do not know if the person has the items or the time needed to complete the recipe. So the Cost Feasibility Analysis Toolkit, or CFA Toolkit. REL Appalachia developed the CFA Toolkit to help education leaders estimate whether implementing supplemental online programs is affordable given a school or district's available resources. Specifically, cost feasibility analysis is a type of cost analysis that compiles information about the resources and associated costs for the program. Implementation helps to determine whether implementation is affordable. A cost feasibility analysis does not provide information on whether a program produces desired outcomes, but it does help to determine whether the payers can afford to implement the program as intended. The CFA Toolkit grew out of a project REL Appalachia carried out with the Virginia Department of Education, VDOE. For the project, the VDOE wanted to better understand the cost of implementing supplemental online programs without having to adapt a generic cost tool. The development of the materials included extensive piloting with Virginia school division leaders and contributions from other online learning experts to ensure that the toolkit was useful for state and local education staff. REL Appalachia researchers then adapted and expanded the Virginia-focused materials to produce this CFA toolkit for a nationwide audience of education leaders who might be considering a diverse array of supplemental online learning programs. So the CFA Toolkit, what's inside? The CFA Toolkit walks users through the 4 stages of a cost feasibility analysis. So stage 1, planning, stage 2, collecting data, stage 3, estimating cost, and stage 4, determining feasibility. It consists of a user guide and the CFA Estimator. Within, those are the 2 main components. The user guide, which explains how to conduct a cost feasibility analysis using the CFA Estimator, includes detailed steps and tips about carrying out the analysis. It includes a glossary, supporting materials, implementation resource list, interview protocols, and interview protocol mapping to the CFA Estimator, and some technical tips. The CFA Estimator is a data collection tool that helps you compile resources and cost information and then estimates the cost of implementing the supplemental online program by resource category and year of program implementation. Each component of the CFA Toolkit helps facilitate one or more of the 4 stages of a cost feasibility analysis. We'll get into the details of what's inside in the following slides. The 4 stages of a cost feasibility analysis are summarized in the user guide with this graphic, which you can find on page 6 of the guide. It provides an overview of each of the steps that are discussed in the user's guide, an estimate for the range of time for each stage, and the corresponding CFA Toolkit materials that support the stage. There are hyperlinks throughout the graphic that take you to the stage or resource mentioned. The implementation resource lists. So during stage 1, you'll look at this resource list. It's a categorized list of the resources needed to implement a supplemental online program and to maintain it annually. The categories include personnel, facilities, materials, and equipment, required student or family inputs, and other resources necessary for program implementation. During this stage, the planning stage, you'll need to compile an implementation resource list. The CFA Toolkit has 2 pre-built lists for you, one for initial costs and one for ongoing costs. This list is pre-populated with resources that are commonly used in the implementation of supplemental online programs, but it is not necessarily an exhaustive or applicable list for every program. You will revise as needed. The CFA Toolkit interview protocols. During stage 2, or the data collection stage, you'll need to collect data on the quantities, time, and costs associated with the resource list for the supplemental online program. One of the ways you'll do this is through interviews with school and district staff. The CFA Toolkit includes 4 interview protocols that help guide these conversations. And then there's the interview protocol mapping to the CFA Estimator. During stage 3, where you estimate costs, you'll enter data you collected from stage 2 in the estimator. The mapping helps to make that process easier, providing guidance on how the information gathered from each question in the interview protocols can be used to be entered in the CFA Estimator. And then the CFA Estimator. It's an Excel-based data collection tool that helps you compile resources and cost information and then estimates the cost of implementing the supplemental online program. The estimator is the main tool of the toolkit. It's helpful during each of the stages of your cost feasibility analysis, and you'll use it to iterate between stages to verify your feasibility determination. After imputing data on the quantity, time, and monetary value of the resources, you can use the CFA Estimator to examine the cost implementation across a 2 to 3 year period.
Okay, so now we're going to move into the cost scenario activities where we'll be walking you through how to use the toolkit with a hypothetical example. So for about 20 minutes, we're going to walk through stage 1, planning, and stage 2, collecting data. During the live webinar, we took about 5 minutes for discussion and questions, at which point you can just pause the recording to reflect on your own. From there, we'll spend about 20 minutes walking through stage 3, which is estimating program costs, and stage 4, determining feasibility. Again, during the live webinar, we then took 10 minutes for discussion and questions, at which point you can pause the recording to reflect on your own.
So the plan for activity 1. First, we'll review the scenario. Then we'll review stage 1, planning, and stage 2, collecting data. Last, we'll use the CFA Toolkit to explore carrying out these 2 stages. This session is meant to be a guide through how to use the CFA Toolkit and to create a space for you to think about questions you might have. So be sure to think about your context as we're going through the scenario. So we will discuss the planning for the analysis stage 1 and collecting data stage 2 in a few minutes. But as we go through the stages, we will use this beyond the building scenario. Please pause the video here to read the scenario. Beyond the building, the program. Beyond the Building is a hypothetical supplemental online learning program that enables districts to offer middle and high school courses aligned with state standards. Classes meet with a certified teacher for 180 minutes a week. Students are also expected to complete at least 120 minutes per week of asynchronous learning. A school counselor leads the program and supports students. Beyond the Building was implemented in 5 middle schools and 3 high schools in a neighboring district, so you can collect information about how they implemented it and what resources are required. Now let's take a minute to read these additional details for the scenario. Please pause the video here and resume when you are ready. Beyond the Building, district scenario. The district. ABC District has 35,000 students. There are roughly 9,000 students across grades 6, 7, and 8, and about 12,000 students in grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. Some families have limited access to high-speed internet. About a third of the families either have 1 computer or 1 tablet device or devices other than cell phones in their homes. This past year, the district provided a personal hotspot to families who needed it and a laptop to middle and high school students who needed one. The district could continue this policy, but would need to account for the cost of these devices and any associated repairs and replacements. Stage 1, planning. This is the 4 stages of the cost feasibility analysis graphic that we shared earlier. Again, it's on page 6 of the user guide if you'd like to refer to it. So stage 1, the planning. During this stage, you would assemble your cost feasibility analysis team and establish a timeline. That's step 1. Next, you describe the program of interest and its necessary resources. That's step 2. And then for step 3, you would define the population of interest for the online supplemental program. During stage 1, you will identify what you need to conduct the cost feasibility analysis, as well as the resources that will be required to implement the supplemental online program. You will assemble your cost feasibility analysis team and establish the timeline for step 1. For example, let's say you're someone that handles the finances at your school or district. Perhaps you'll want to add someone that works with online learning to your team. From there, you'll establish a timeline for your 2-person team that perhaps is a little longer than if you were able to recruit a 3rd person or even a larger team. From there, you'll want to begin to describe the program of interest and its necessary resources in step 2. For example, your school is considering implementing Beyond the Building. Which staff do you need? Is there a dedicated computer lab for students taking these online courses? Or do they take them from their personal devices? Lastly, you'll define the population of interest for the online supplemental program in step 3. So for example, what schools are implementing or interested in implementing this program. Maybe it's one school, or maybe it's multiple districts in the state. Once you have completed these steps, you will be ready to begin stage 2, collecting data, which we will talk about in just a few minutes. So to assist with stage 1, planning, the toolkit includes an implementation resource list that you will revise as needed during this stage. It includes a detailed list of resources that many supplemental online learning programs require. At this point, you may want to pause the video to go to page A2 and A3 in the CFA Toolkit user guide to see the resource list. Stage 2, collecting data. Remember that this graphic is on page 6 of the user guide, if you would like to refer to it. So collecting data involves gathering information from existing sources, such as budgets or expenditure documents in step 1, and collecting additional data through interviews with program implementers in step 2. The CFA Toolkit includes the interview protocols that can be adapted to collect information and data about the supplemental online learning programs. As you collect data, you can use the CFA Estimator as a place to enter these data and return to it when it's time to estimate program costs in stage 3. Information needed about resources. There are 3 main categories of information needed to estimate the cost of resources: quantities, time, and value or price. For quantities, you might ask questions like how many school counselors will be needed or how many computers. Thinking about time, how much of a school counselor's time will be needed, or what proportion of computer time will be used for the supplemental online program. For value or price, what is the school counselor's salary, including benefits? And for the computer, what is the price of that computer? For today's scenario, we will focus on the examples here, which are school counselors and computers, specifically student laptops. We will look at how the toolkit materials can guide you in gathering information about the school counselors and student laptops. So we know a neighboring district already implemented Beyond the Building. We interviewed staff using the interview protocols in the toolkit. Here's an example of one of the questions and a response. If you use the protocol, you would replace the placeholder bracket supplemental online program with Beyond the Building. So this is from interview protocol 1, school counselor or supplemental online program lead. And we are using question 4. And the participant's response to this question is, there are 2 of us that share the responsibilities. I spend about half of my time on things related to the day-to-day activities for Beyond the Building, plus about 2 hours a day communicating with families and students about their enrollment, progress, activities coming up, and stuff like that. From this response, you can gather data about the quantity and time. This school counselor shared that their school has 2 school counselors, and that the school counselor spends half their time implementing the program. This person shared that they spend 2 hours a day on communication. 2 hours a day for 5 days a week is 10 hours. 10 hours of a 40-hour week is about 20% of a person's time. So a counselor will spend about 20% of their time on communication. Again, using interview protocol 1 for a school counselor or supplemental online program lead, we can look at question 8, which is, does your school need to set aside time for any training or preparation specific to implementing Beyond the Building for you or your team? If so, how much time do you estimate the training to take? This training or preparation can be initiated at the school or district level because it might not be required by Beyond the Building. And the participant responds, at the beginning of the year, we had trainings and time to get familiar with the program. The initial training was 10 days during the pre-planning weeks, and there will be 4 days at the end of the year. Then there has been regular training on things happening throughout the year, including 3 additional days a month, plus maybe 2 hours a week. From this response, you can gather additional data on the counselor's time for training. This estimate is a little math heavy, so bear with me. The next slide will display the estimates. So 3 days a month is in a 10-month school year would be 30 days for training, plus the 14 initial days and end of year training days for a total of 44 days spent on training. The additional 2 hours a week would be 80 hours for the year or 10 days. The 10 days plus the 44 days totals 54 days of training. For a 180-day contracted school year, 54 days is almost 30%. That percentage is likely high for training, but we used round numbers and percentages for ease in this example. So based on the existing data that you likely found for this scenario in the interviews, here are examples of data you will use later in stage 3, estimating program costs. We will return to this slide in the next activity. So let's pause here. During the live event, this is when we transition back to questions, but you may want to pause here to reflect on the scenario and think about questions you have before moving on to activity 2.
Okay, so now we're going to move into the second activity. We will be reviewing stage 3, estimating program costs, and stage 4, determining feasibility. Again, we'll use the CFA Toolkit, including the cost estimator, to explore carrying out these 2 stages. Reminder to please download the toolkit materials from the link in the description of the event. All right, so again, this table on the left is the 4 stages of cost feasibility analysis graphic that we shared earlier, and it's also on page 6 of the user's guide if you'd like to refer to it. So now we're in stage 3, estimating costs. And in this stage, the first step is to update the list of resources in the CFA Estimator as needed. For example, if we were doing this for real, we'd need to add a row for hotspots that we learned we'll need. The second step is to finalize all of your data, including the quantities, time, and price for the initial year. And if you're planning on running the program for more than 1 year, in step 3, you would annualize those costs or spread out those costs for year 2 and year 3 of implementation as applicable. In step 4, if desired, you can disaggregate costs by relevant dimension, which, for example, could help you understand the total costs for, say, maybe personnel alone, or maybe the cost that the school would incur versus the cost that the district takes on. And so we're going to use the data we gathered during the first activity to go through these steps and use the estimator. Okay, so here's the same slide we saw before that summarizes our existing data and the data we got from interviews about the online program. I recommend you pause the recording here to read through it again and maybe even screenshot the slide or take some notes on some of these numbers. But basically we know 90 students need a hotspot and a laptop. The price for each laptop is $400. We got that, say, maybe from the supplier catalog. The median salary with fringe benefits for each school counselor is $75,000. And from the interview data, we got information on where the counselors spend their time, how many we need, the use of the laptops, etc. Okay, so now we're going to switch from the slides to the CFA Estimator, which again is part of the toolkit you downloaded. So this is the Microsoft Excel file. So just a quick orientation to the tool. I'm on the first tab here, the first sheet, and it just is a contents page. You can see the name of each tab and a description of it. Clicking these links will take you to the respective tab. So moving on to the How to Customize tab, there are some technical details here on how to use the tool, enter data, edit the tool, etc. And all of this information is also in the appendix of the user's guide. Then these following 3 tabs, year 1 initial costs, year 2 ongoing costs, and year 3 ongoing costs are blank sheets for you to fill in with your data. As you can see here, we have our resources listed out and spaces for quantity, price/value, and time for you to enter data. This final column here auto updates based on what you enter in these first few tabs. So for example, let's say we entered a quantity of 2, say maybe $20,000 and a time of, let's say 50% or 0.5, then this column automatically updates. And that's the same for these other blank tabs for your ongoing costs. Then we move into our example tabs, and this is where we'll be working from mostly here today. This that you're looking at looks exactly like what you would download from the link that we provided. We just have numbers filled in here so you can get a sense of what a filled out sheet looks like. The only difference is that I have highlighted a few of these numbers just to make it easier. So remember that this is a simplified example for beyond the building. We're only looking at costs associated with the school counselors. So that's under 1.2 school counselors. And it's broken up by all of these different responsibilities. And that's why I have these cells highlighted. And again, we're looking at the costs associated with student laptops. So that's down here, 3.2.2, and I have those cells highlighted. Okay, so looking at our existing data as well as our interview data, we learned that our school counselors spend about 30% of their time doing initial recruitment and training / onboarding. So under time, we would enter 0.3 to represent 30%. We know they spend 50% of their time on their regular program responsibilities. So here we'd enter a 0.5, and lastly, 20% on outreach / communication. So we'd enter 0.2. We also know we need 2 counselors and they make $75,000 a year. So we'd enter 2 here, $75,000 here for each of the responsibilities. And again, this final column here auto updates. So if I were to have this blank, our program total here would be blank as well. But when you enter a number, it auto updates. All right. Now, we also learned we're going to need to set up 90 hotspots for some students, and we're also going to need about 90 laptops. Hotspots wasn't something that was on the original resource list, so we would need to add it under 3.1 internet here. In order to add that data in, we would right click here, insert a row, and let's say we put 3.1.2 hotspots. And we proceed to enter data. More details of that are available in the how to customize tab, as well as the appendix of the user's guide. But let's look at the laptops. So we learned that we're going to need 90 of them. Each one costs about $400, and they're being purchased for this program. They're going to be used 100% of the time for beyond the building. So under time, we would enter a 1 to represent 100% of the time. And now in the interview data, we also learned that we're expecting these laptops to be used for 3 years. That means that we're going to use them in year 1, our initial year, as well as year 2 and year 3. So let's say we want to spread those costs out. Since they're going to be used in multiple years, you know, we have this fairly high cost that we can spread out across 3 years. That's where we're going to use the annualization of resources columns. So as it notes here, we have a one-time cost resource that can be used in year 2, and we enter a 1 to note that we're going to be using it in year 2. Same thing in column L, we enter a 1 in year 3. And this annual program cost by item number here automatically updates to spread that cost out. So it turns into $12,000 per year. Let's say, for example, we didn't have a 1 here. This number would be $18,000 to reflect this $36,000 total spread across 2 years. 36 divided by 2 is 18,000. But we'll go ahead and put that 1 back. So that's how you would enter that data. And lastly, I'll show you this column M, customized calculations. This is where you can update your total to reflect whatever data you're looking to collect. So as it says here, we mark an X in the row for the items that we'd like to include in our customized total. Let's say, for example, we want to just account for our personnel costs. Well, we'd enter an X here in each of these personnel cost line items, and then we'd maybe, remove the ones under facilities. We'd remove the X's under equipment/technology. And what happens is that your total row, all the way at the bottom here, row 66, updates to only include those items for which you marked an X. Yeah, so down here we have all of our totals. This is our customized calculation total. This is our annualized total. And this is just the total without any annualization. And you would also be able to enter your number of students in these fields, and the tool automatically calculates a per student cost. The last thing I should note that I forgot to mention is that when you enter a 1 here for annualizing this resource, this amount will automatically pre-populate in your ongoing tabs to carry that data over. Great, so now we're going to return to our slides. And, okay. So now that we've entered all of our data, we're ready for the final stage, and that's stage 4, determining feasibility, which is where you determine whether the resources you have or can access are adequate to implement the supplemental online learning program based on your estimates. So you'll also review the collected data and adjust your cost estimates or collect more data if needed. Your step 1 is to collect information on available resources and compare them with the cost estimates. And then step 2 is to decide whether you need to modify any estimates based on the comparison analysis. And as you do this work, you might find that your initial cost estimate is really just an estimate of the most ideal or most comprehensive way to approach implementation, but it might be possible to implement the program with fidelity using different, less costly resources such as alternative materials or staff in alternative roles, like maybe a paraprofessional instead of a certified teacher. And you can consider the nuances that you learned from the interviews about day-to-day implementation, in addition to the data that you analyzed using the CFA Estimator, to determine whether the supplemental online program is truly unaffordable or whether it is reasonable to consider alternative, less costly implementation scenarios. So for example, we entered that we needed 90 laptops. Each of them cost $400. Maybe we can cut down on that cost there and say, okay, students are mostly using it to look at the materials while they're at home. Perhaps we could order iPads instead, and maybe that could bring the per item cost down to $200. That's just a hypothetical. Okay, so as you're determining feasibility, here are some example questions that you might consider. What resources are or will be available to support the supplemental online program? Using our example, we know we need 2 full-time counselors and some hotspots to implement this program. Do you already have the counselors, or would we need to hire them? Which resource categories require the most funding? Can you revise any of the estimates considering your district or school's context and still implement the supplemental online program as intended? Should you consider an alternate way of implementing this supplemental online program and conduct a pilot first? If so, do per student estimates change at all? Should your school or district consider the cost feasibility of a different supplemental online program? How do funding sources such as state or federal funding affect your decisions? Are there other funding sources such as grants from foundations that you need to consider as available? For example, what costs do you need to cover from district or state funds? What might be covered by funds from the federal government, like Title I or Title IV funding? Or maybe you know that a foundation is donating technology right now, so you could take out your the cost of laptops from your cost estimate. What does implementing the supplemental online program fill? Are there other programs or uses for these resources that would better serve your school or district? Again, these are just examples and they could vary widely based on your context. So during the live event, we stopped here for questions and discussions. So you might consider pausing the recording just to reflect on what we learned and how it might apply to the context in your school or district. So we'd like to thank the Virginia Department of Education for collaborating on the initial development of the Virginia Cost Feasibility Analysis Toolkit that members of the REL Appalachia team then adopted to create this toolkit that you saw today. This slide contains several resources for staying in touch with the REL. I encourage you to check them out. That's our website. You can subscribe to our listserv. There's an email and our Twitter. Thanks, everyone. Take care.